Okay, so I'm gonna try to keep it super simple today because I really want you to learn something. And this video is for beginners specifically. How do you film a super simple cinematic sequence of yourself with a minimum amount of gear? So super simple shots, no camera movement, no crazy angles, and natural light only. Similar to this sequence that I shot a while ago when I was testing some anamorphic lenses. And I really want to emphasize on keeping it simple. I know that many of you have probably watched a bunch of cool dynamic videos, fast, snappy, super creative angles and transitions, but if you're a beginner, just forget all that stuff because you don't need it to create a nice, good-looking cinematic video. Not at all. So I'm going to show you how I film a basic, simple cinematic sequence of myself. Here we go. Story is king. That's what you always hear, right? And yeah, I agree. It's like gameplay in a video game. It's more important than realistic graphics. But just like that gameplay doesn't mean that a story has to be complicated. Simple gameplay usually works better than complicated gameplay, right? And we're not trying to make a movie or a documentary here. We're just trying to learn some basic filmmaking. So your story, keep it simple. Just have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and that's it. And one of the simplest stories is just someone, in this case you, moving from point A to point B. The beginning is where you start your little journey, then the middle is all the things you see and do along the way, and then the end of the story is your destination, where you end up. And keeping it simple like this also allows you to, focus more on filming and your camera settings, exposure, light, because we're not trying to learn how to screenwrite here. We're trying to learn how to film a little story, not how to write a story. Okay, so like I said, no crazy angles, no camera movement, we're keeping it simple. I'm gonna use the word simple a lot in this video. Just focus on composition, correct exposure, and shot variation. So you don't need a lot of gear. Your camera or a smartphone, a versatile lens if you're shooting with a camera, something like a 17 to 28 is what I like to use, but maybe a 24 to 70 millimeter is even more versatile. And then a lightweight tripod is useful, but that's basically it. I'll link a few of the things that I use in the description. And there's also one thing that, well, I'm not gonna say that it's indispensable, but it's super useful if you're filming by yourself. What is it? Well, if you're using a camera, then an app that allows you to monitor your camera with your smartphone wirelessly. Sony, for example, has the Monitor and Control app, but there's also third-party apps. And if your camera doesn't have Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, or the apps don't support your camera, well, I use this thing a lot. It's the Axoon CineView Nano, and it allows you to use your smartphone as a monitor with any camera. The Axoon app is also great. You get all the features you need: focus peaking, waveform, histogram, anamorphic squeeze. Even though you don't need all that stuff for what we're doing here, a simple cinematic sequence, just seeing what your camera sees, that's important here. Because, for example, if you want to do a shot of you walking in the distance, well, if you don't have a wireless monitor, you're gonna have to set up and frame your shot, try to guess where you're gonna have to walk in the shot for the perfect composition, and then hit record, do a test shot, come back, check it, and then maybe do it all over again 2 or 3 times until you get it right. And with a wireless monitor, you can just frame your shots and then go in front of the camera and check on your smartphone where you have to be for the perfect shot. So it's super helpful and it saves you a lot of time. It really does. And then another thing that's also not indispensable, but it was useful for me because the battery of my Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K is not that great. So if I use that camera, I always take a V-mount battery that allows me to film for 6 or 7 hours without changing the battery. And with the normal battery of the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 6K, I can film like 20 or 25 minutes. So yeah, that's a big difference. But if your camera has great battery life, then no problem, of course. Natural light only. A few tips. First of all, go out in the morning or in the evening. Sunrise, sunset. Golden hour, blue hour, that time. And look, it's not that you can't shoot a cinematic video at noon, but especially if the sun is blasting high in the sky, it's just more difficult. Because on a movie set, for example, in super bright, super contrasty conditions, you'll see extra lighting, sun diffusers, reflectors, and then a whole crew to handle all that. And you don't have all that stuff. And you're all by yourself. Ah, so sad. No, not at all. Solo filmmaking, super fun. But there are limitations, of course. And, you know, blue hour, golden hour, it just looks naturally cinematic. And if you're lucky and get some mist, for example, even better. And then the second tip I want to give you is that backlight almost always works. A beautiful sky with some dark silhouettes almost always looks good. Now, of course, you have to be careful with your exposure and everything. Usually how I do it, run and gun, I just make sure that the sky is exposed correctly, that nothing's clipping, and usually it's okay. But don't worry if you make mistakes. That's the point of all this. You have to make mistakes, because that's when you learn something. I still make mistakes every single day, and my videos are not perfect, my cinematic sequences are not perfect. I'm still learning a lot. But that's what's so great about it. But yeah, so sunrise, sunset, golden hour, blue hour, naturally cinematic. Nature does all the work for you. What shots do you need? Well, usually I make a simple shot list, and I have like a shot template that I use. And it's not a secret template or anything, it's a template that most filmmakers and videographers use. And I use Milanote to structure and organize everything, my pre-production process. And they're also sponsoring this video, just so you know. Okay, so look, this is what my finished pre-production board looks like in Milanote. And it's basically a pre-production template that I've created for myself, right? But of course, you could also use one of Milanote's pre-made templates for filmmakers. But my workflow, my pre-production process is always the same, so it makes sense that I always use my own template. So I always have a to-do list, I create a gear list, so all the gear that I'm gonna need for this video. I also collect my inspiration videos here. I basically just copy-paste links to YouTube videos that inspire me, and you can even watch them right here. It's super intuitive. And I also always create a stills board for inspiration, so just drag a new board onto my inspiration column, the title stills, and then in there I drop all the screenshots that I found when looking for inspiration online. And I do the same for typography and music. And then this here, well, this is one of the most important boards. This is where I create a shot list. And it doesn't have to be a super extensive, complete shot list, because again, we're not making a movie or a documentary here. We're just trying to learn some basic filmmaking, right? So usually I only make a shot list for a few key moments, I guess you could call them. And a key moment is something you do during the video, an action that you definitely want in your sequence. In my video, for example, it was walking over a dirt road with a cool sky in the background, then also leaning on a bridge railing, looking at the view, and walking over this bridge thingy. And for each of these key moments, I make sure to get 3 shots, a wide, a medium, and a close-up. That's it. And I might not use all of them when I edit the video, but it's better to have them and not need them than the other way around, right? And then usually I just use one of my inspiration screenshots to visualize the shot, if there's one that's similar to the shot I want, of course. Or I make a quick sketch on a screenshot, for this medium shot for example, you know, my legs. Or I make a sketch from scratch. And look, I suck at drawing, but it doesn't matter. What matters is that I know what shots I need before I go out to film. Because when I arrive on location, I don't want to think about what shot am I gonna get now. Because it will just double the time that you're out there. And time is money, right? But then, of course, when I'm on location, I also get some new ideas for extra shots. And of course, I also always shoot the surroundings and details of the surroundings, because I want to cut that in between my key moments. Here's an example. So this is one of those extra shots of the surroundings. This is the wide shot of key moment 1. Then here it cuts to a medium of key moment 1, back to the wide. Another extra shot. And this is a close-up of key moment 1. And the great thing about Milanote is that, you know, it's like a living organism. It's flexible. It's not that it has to be 100% done before you go out shooting. So if you want to try it out, you can sign up for free with the link in the description. Just go check it out. So there you go. Just come up with some key moments and then get a wide, a medium, and a close for each moment. Keep it simple. Don't make it too complicated when it comes to compositions, because again, we're not making a movie here. So what I always do is I just follow the rule of thirds because it almost always looks good. Again, keep it simple, you know? We're gonna keep repeating it. And what also always looks good is depth and leading lines. A road that goes into the distance, you know, those things always looks good. So try to find those too. And when it comes to angles, I just keep it simple. I use medium height tripod shots, and then I also like, you know, to put my camera on the ground and get some super low shots. Or usually I put my camera on my backpack. And then maybe you could also, you know, try to get some interesting object in the foreground, for example, to add some depth, but it's definitely not necessary. I know it's like a thing on YouTube, like get something in the foreground to create depth and dynamism, whatever, but it's not necessary to get something in the foreground in every shot. In movies, for example, there's also not always something blurry in the foreground to create depth. Not at all. So yeah, I think that's like a YouTube thing. Epic cinematic B-roll, remember? But don't worry too much about it. Just rule of thirds and leading lines. And yeah, I think that's about it. Look, I could make dozens of videos like this, but the thing is, you'll learn the most if now, after watching this video, you go out there and you film something. And if it's your first one, it's not gonna be perfect. Like I said, my videos are still not perfect, ever. But that's okay. The most important thing is that you have to learn something. And you can only do that by going out there, filming something, making mistakes. So that's what I want you to do now. If you don't, I'm gonna come over there and kick you in the butt. Salut en tot de volgende.